Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. My name is Ami Mehr, and I am excited to be leading the next portion of our program this morning as part of MDIC's annual patient forum. My name is Amy Mehr, and by day, I'm a senior leader at a biopharma software startup focused on the delivery of modern technology to support modern science. And really, my daytime goal at that company, which is called Benchling, is that if technology can help drive acceleration with getting research candidates to patients more quickly, we will figure out a way. I have worked in the life sciences, biotechnology, and software space, as well as medical device software space for well over the past 25 years, primarily focused on clinical trials and data management to help patients. But first, I'm going to start with a story and my connection to today's event. So as I said, I've been working in this industry for a very long time, but back in 2014, I was out rowing. I rowed competitively here in Boston. And just wasn't feeling right under my left arm. Multiple doctors and specialist visits eventually led to a number of tests. And it was determined that I just had a pulled lat muscle. I was sent for some physical therapy and sent on my way. But the next following year, I happened to be due for some follow-up testing. I remember asking my husband, because we had just returned from a wonderful family vacation to Disney World, if I needed to have this follow-up testing. And he's like, you're in the system, you might as well follow up with the testing. And lo and behold, in going for that testing, learned at the age of 36 that I had breast cancer. I had no family history. I was an athlete. I ate really well, took very good care of myself. But was diagnosed with breast cancer at the age of 36. Being a 36-year-old diagnosed with breast cancer, you don't meet a lot of other 30-year-olds that have breast cancer. And so it was a very scary experience as a patient for the very first time in my life. I was fortunate enough, because I had a 2-year-old son at the time, to have my mom come to Boston. She helped take care of my family. And I was eventually able to get back to work in the fall of 2014 and actually compete 12 weeks after my surgery in the head of the Charles Regatta, which was a very, very big milestone for me. My mom actually returned to upstate New York after taking care of me. And we had learned actually through a 3D mammogram that my breast cancer had actually been discovered very early. And what ended up happening just several weeks later was that my mom, who had never missed a mammogram one day in her life, got diagnosed with breast cancer within 6 months of myself, and ended up back here in Boston going through a very similar surgery. So within a 6-month period of time, I went from just being a mom and an athlete to becoming a patient and becoming a caregiver. And really from that day, really became a patient advocate for other women affected by breast cancer. I continued on, but in 2019, started to feel really weird rowing. My balance was off. I wasn't feeling right. And lo and behold, I would go on to be diagnosed with a serious brain tumor that was fused to my brainstem. And following well over a 20-hour surgery in November of 2019, I would come out of that and essentially survive a very serious condition and be essentially reliant on a device for the rest of my life. I tell this story because obviously I started out my career, ended up in the software space, never imagined that I would ever become part of this whole ecosystem as a patient or a caregiver. But here I am, I'm a patient, I'm a caregiver. I've devoted my entire career to the life sciences, biotech, and medical device industry. And now today I live dependent on medical devices in my own body. My coping mechanism and why I am here today has been to really share my story. And if you Google my name, you'll probably find a few videos about me that will probably more vividly depict the story if you're interested in learning a little bit more. Today, I am delighted to partner with MDIC to spend the next hour or so exploring topics with three other wonderful individuals that I have really been excited to learn more about as part of preparing for today. And I look forward next to welcoming our panelists as we move forward with the program. So Mary Jo, I'd like to welcome you this morning. I was thrilled to spend some time with you and get to know you a little bit better. Obviously, I know you've been very successful in your career. You've been a caregiver. I just want to welcome you to the panel today and was hopeful if you could talk a little bit about your background and what you bring to today's discussion.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you for telling your story. It's I'm very touched by hearing your story, and I appreciate that. And my thanks to Kurt and to the MDIC folks for giving me this opportunity to speak to you all today. So, in sharing my journey, I will start with where it started. It began in 1979 when my youngest sister Karen, at the age of 17, suffered sudden cardiac arrest due to an inherited heart rhythm disorder that prior to this we did not know she had. She during that cardiac arrest was not resuscitated early enough to save her brain tissue. She suffered profound brain injury and to this day requires 24/7 care. She is alive and but otherwise requires that care. I have become her caregiver at this point in my life. It's an honor to take care of her. But that whole experience left us with questions, grief and questions. How could this happen to an otherwise very healthy young woman? And so that was what propelled me into my career in the medical device industry. I should tell you that because she survived and the doctors were able to see an EKG of her heart rhythm, it was determined that she had something called long QT syndrome, which can cause sudden death in children, teens, and young adults. And the rest of us were all tested. At the time, we only had EKGs to test, but later on, we were able to get genetic testing as well to confirm that several of us in the family also have long QT syndrome, including myself. Another one of my sisters suffered cardiac arrest 2 years later and was successfully resuscitated at the time. So this is what propelled me into the industry. I have had the opportunity to help develop a number of different technologies for resuscitation as well as ECG systems, both so diagnostics as well as therapeutics for interventional cardiology and electrophysiology. What happened to Karen shouldn't have happened to anyone, and it should not happen to any family. So that has been my journey, my quest all these years, is to help people, help families. I've had the opportunity to work for a number of large multinational companies, but also have directed 2 startups in the medical device space. My greatest honor, my most rewarding position was with an organization called Cardiac Arrhythmias Research and Education, and we were a national patient advocacy organization that supports patients and families who have inherited heart rhythm disorders like my family. And we were able to help a number of families and patients navigate the healthcare system and tease out these otherwise fairly rare disorders. In 2007, after all these years of being the advocate and being the product developer, 2007, I became a patient. I suffered cardiac arrest myself and thankfully was immediately resuscitated. I am now on my second implanted cardioverter defibrillator, ICD, that helps me stay alive. And I'm most grateful for that. I also serve on Boston Scientific's Patient Safety Advisory Board. We're a group of independent experts in all areas of patient advocacy, cardiology, electrophysiology, ethics, and we help to advise the company independently about the right things to do for patients, specifically for patient safety. So again, thank you for this opportunity to speak with you, and I look forward to hearing the stories of the rest of my panelists.
Well, thank you, Mary Jo. And I can hear in your voice, how dedicated you are to your family and dedicated to this industry, as well as obviously, you've been personally affected, and obviously we have something in common, and that, we're tied to the device industry for life. And I think we'll learn through the rest of the stories today and what we hear from the other panelists. We all have a lot in common, and I just want to thank you for your grit and authenticity today, and contributing to our discussion. I would like to welcome Heather Hodges to our panel. As a mother myself, I know the job very well that you have, and the love and devotion we have to our children. And in addition to mother, I know you also play the role of caregiver. So I would love for you to introduce yourself to everyone. I think you might be on mute, Heather.
Okay, can you hear me now?
I can. Thank you.
Thanks for having me here today. I am mom to Lila, who is 6 years old. She was born with a very rare genetic brain disorder. There are only like 400 cases worldwide of her specific disorder. And it was after a very healthy pregnancy. They told us nothing was wrong. And at 5 months old, she was shunted for hydrocephalus, which was devastating to us because the fail rates are so great in a shunt. And then not long after she was shunted, she started having seizures, and they attributed it to a brain malformation that she has. And on her 8th seizure, our local fire department came and convinced us to just go get checked out at our local children's hospital. I still remember the fireman said, if this was my baby and it's a Sunday, it's going to be slow in the ER. You'll get in and you'll get out. So we took the ride, and we didn't leave the hospital for 28 days. Because she was diagnosed with severely low blood sugar. When we got to the ER, her sugar was 18, which if you know anything about blood sugar, it should be well over 80. And so that started, the hydrocephalus was devastating enough, but the blood sugar was her body like actively trying to kill her, basically. So that's where my advocacy for her really started. We were admitted, transferred down to the base hospital. And for 28 days, we just tried to figure out how we could keep our little, at that point, she was 7 months old, how we could keep our 7-month-old baby alive. And we left the hospital with a feeding tube and a continuous glucose monitor. I said, I can't poke my baby, all day long, every day. And so at 7 months old, she was fitted with a Dexcom. And we have relied on that device to really keep her alive for the last 6 years. And my full-time job has been 24 hours a day watching that sugar and doing feeds based on the sugar. And then I actually found a drug trial specific to her disorder and got her enrolled in it. And the drug has changed our lives dramatically. And so she is really a pretty typical 6-year-old with a few little extra pieces added to her body. But it definitely, these devices keep her alive and keep, this Dexcom, I watch it 24 hours a day, and her aide watches it at school. She carries her own little fanny pack with her iPhone in it that she knows when it buzzes, she needs to tell someone. And it's pretty amazing because we were told she would probably never walk or talk. And she's about the spunkiest little 6-year-old you've ever seen. So again, thank you for having me. And I'm really excited to do this for her.
Thank you, Heather. And as someone who's been in the clinical trial space for most of my career, it just gives me the chills, like hearing what you said about the clinical trial. Because for me, like that's why I did what I did, was to help folks like your daughter. And I can't help but not shed a few tears here as a mom, because I'm sure it's been my hat goes off to you, because we would do whatever we can for our kids, as a mother. So my hat goes off to you. Before we move on with questions, because I already could ask Mary Jo and Heather a bunch of questions, I would love to introduce Ali, and welcome you. It's wonderful to have you here. And I'd love for you to just spend a few moments in telling your story to everyone.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. My name is Ali. I go by the pronouns she and her. I'm a white female with a orange and white top on and a power wheelchair with an office background and blonde hair and big orange earrings. So by day, I am a corporate disability strategy consultant for multiple corporations around the world. And my story started out when I was 27 years old. I was living in my home in the out island in the Bahamas. And I was a technical analysis day trader. I still do that today. And I took a shallow water dive and I just hit sand. And I shattered my vertebrae and sustained a C6 spinal cord injury. It took us 22 hours on an out island with no doctors, directing our own medical care to get to Miami, where I underwent emergency surgery with a spinal fusion, leaving me a C6 quadriplegic, paralyzed from the chest down, with paralyzed hands and limited upper body mobility. My English father said to me in all seriousness that, "Kid, you broke your body, not your brain. Get to work." So, in a very English fashion, he put me to work. But the next 7 years of my life, I spent in and out of hospitals with multiple surgeries, with cervical cancer, pulmonary embolisms, hyperthyroidism, stage 4 pressure sores down to the bone, life-threatening spinal cysts, where I actually had to move to China because the United States healthcare system failed me for a number of reasons. So I was quite literally in military mode for 7 years of my life, working full time as a day trader, but with no sense of community. I moved to Raleigh in 2015, and I developed a very large stage 4 pressure sore on my tailbone, multiple surgeries, poor surgeons, a lot of unfortunate circumstances. And during this year in bed, I was denied medically necessary equipment I needed to not only survive in my life, but to thrive. So I'm very tenacious. My middle name is pleasantly persistent. And I started to fight health insurance companies by writing letters of medical necessity, back them up by peer-reviewed journal articles, and teaching myself how to navigate the health insurance appeals process. I wish I would have chosen a more fun advocacy topic, but one that needed attention deeply. And this work went national. And so my passion in life is patient care advocacy, with respect to getting patients in on the ground level with medical technologies, understanding health insurance, and getting what they need to not only survive, not just for those with mobility impairments in my situation, but people with all disabilities and all chronic conditions, whatever they may be. I live my life. I have a lot of, I'm the bionic woman. I have a lot of some metal in my neck from laminectomies and different surgeries, but I rely full time on durable medical equipment for my survival, from catheters to power wheelchairs to my legs. They are my legs. So I dedicate at least 20 to 30% of my week to patient care advocacy on a lot of different fronts, on healthcare equity access. And also it's a passion of mine to get all patients involved in the beginning stages of the development of these clinical trials. I have been involved in several clinical trials myself around the world. They failed. They almost killed me. I have coded, I think, 7 times. It's very challenging to kill me. I'm like the Energizer Bunny on wheels. I just keep coming back. But I find it my life's purpose and mission to stand up for those, because as many of you know, and your stories are very touching, sometimes those with disabilities or caregivers, and I have 24/7 hour caregivers out of pocket because I don't get Medicare or Medicaid. So I have to work 12, 14 hours a day just to survive with my expenses. Many people can't fight for themselves. They're trying to survive on a daily basis. I feel fortunate and blessed, despite what I've had to overcome, to be able to be a voice for others.
So Ali, excuse me. So first of all, it's wonderful to meet you.
Pleasure.
The first thing that comes to mind, which was not in my prepared questions, but I always use the phrase, it's like you become the CEO of your own health.
Yeah,
And
or I run an HR firm.
yes, you're in charge.
Yes.
So maybe I'll ask more about that later. And people that have been on panels with me before know I always come up with questions as we get into like these wonderful discussions. But I had many images of Ali as the CEO as you were doing your introduction. And you're right. Like we all have a story, and that's the power. And I know, our first speaker mentioned this, like you can't just talk to one patient who has a condition and compare that person to all the other situations. Like everyone has a very unique story. It's their diagnosis journey, it's their treatment. We can't just have one voice in this whole ecosystem. And I think despite, obviously all the software and technology advances, like it's just still tough as the patient, as the advocate, and as someone who might be caring, like in Mary Jo's case, or Heather for her daughter, as the caregiver. And I look forward to dipping into some meaty topics today. So Mary Jo, I know obviously things happened with your sister. This all kind of like happens, but like, can you talk me through a little bit about like when in your mind you kind of transitioned from like being her, a sister to being a patient advocate and caregiver, and like how'd you begin to go through that process yourself? I think you're on mute.
Sorry about that. It started almost immediately because, as I always tell everybody, I'm the oldest and the bossiest in my family, and I really felt that we didn't know, and here we were all ticking time bombs, and at the time didn't even know that, and I immediately sensed that well, first of all, she was in a coma for 4 months, and we took turns at the hospital just because we wanted someone there for the worst. And following that, she was another 2 years in the hospital. And I had just graduated from college, and I had a completely different job in a totally different industry than in healthcare. And it occurred to me right then that I couldn't be. I was the Tide soap lady in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I realized I couldn't sell Tide soap. I needed to do something in healthcare, and again, as I said earlier, figure out what happened to her and how could this happen to a young athlete. She was an athlete. She was a scholar. She was amazingly talented, and then she was just felled. And as I said, this should not happen to anybody, and it shouldn't happen to any family. So that was really what launched me. And I interviewed with over 40 companies to get a job in the healthcare industry, any job. I took anything I could get. And that got me into critical care, and then into defibrillators and ECG systems. And it allowed me to be right in the trenches, making devices that could diagnose these types of conditions and also fix them. So defibrillators, this was before we had automated defibrillators. And so that was the process. And from there, then into advocacy, where it was really in the meat of it, where I could actually talk to patients and talk to companies and talk to physicians and get them to rally behind our patients. So that was how it started.
And it's interesting, if I even think about the start of my own career and then how things have the path I've gone down, like some of it's been driven by like life experiences and what we feel passionate about, and our calling. And I've always believed that some of those things happen for a reason, and it sounds similar to like your calling to obviously get more involved to help your sister and help other families. So that completely resonates with me. Heather, obviously, the patient experience of your daughter, again, I can't even begin to put in words, because again, I have 2 kids myself, 2 boys. I know what it's like to be a mom, and I know what it's like to be pregnant and be expecting your baby, and like you have all these things in your mind, and then to be sort of dealt the cards that you were dealt. And I'm just curious, as you were going through the process as a young mom, how did you kind of go through that transition from mom to caregiver to patient advocate for your daughter?
I mean, I don't know. It just, my husband, we have another child. He's 16, a 16-year-old son, and he's my easy kid, super healthy, never sick with anything. And so we learned nothing with him. And so when Lila got sick, my husband was always with me. We always did things together because we really didn't know, everything was always up in the air. And I watched him be able to process information that they were telling him and then spit out questions. And he really taught me, like, I can't just sit in the background. Before with my son, the pediatrician would say, oh, he's got this, take this antibiotic, but I would never, ever like question something that they said or question their course of treatment. And I remember the first time I was made to meet with a dietitian in the endocrinology department. And the very first thing she said to me was, I don't know anything about tube feeds. Well, that was the only way my kid was fed at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So already I'm like, oh, this is going to go well. And then she told me we needed to cut calories. And I literally said to her, you have to stop. Do you even know why my child is here today? And she looked at me, and it was at that moment, before I would have just sat back and just been like, well, okay, how can we cut food even though my kid's severely hypoglycemic? And she said, I guess I don't understand. And I was like, well, let me tell you a little bit about my daughter. And then I went in to tell her about, how I would have to unhook her from her feeding tube from her formula and shoot just plain sugar water in her belly to bring her sugar up, just to keep her alive. So it was at that moment where it was like, I realized that these people are working for me, and I'm really the one in charge until Lila's an adult, if she can make her own medical decisions, and that was like really empowering to realize, like, I don't need to just sit and listen, meekly. I have to stand up for my kid, like I have to make sure these people realize that I know what I'm talking about. And I've got her, like I've got this. And it took a while to prove that, but people don't mess with me anymore. Her team knows I've got it.
I don't think anyone's going to mess with anyone on this call. So I was like, I'm going to give everyone a virtual hug when we're done. But no, I think there's something powerful in what you just said that really resonates with me, is that I remember even going through the breast cancer, which by the time I got diagnosed with the brain tumor, similar to Ali, I think it was like, get out of my way, I'm in charge. I was very in charge of the situation at that point. But what I realized is that, like, for a while I was just like taking information and answering, and like almost felt like I didn't have control of the situation. And then I realized, and it was through coaching from two other, I call them my angels, that were basically, you're the warrior preparing for battle, and like, don't let anyone get in your way. And if you're not satisfied with how you're being treated or what you're being told, like, you're in charge.
Yep.
And I think that's the biggest bit of advice I give to anyone who's a patient going through something. Everyone, again, has their own story, but like, you have to feel empowered to take control of the situation. So obviously, and, caring for your daughter, we could go on about this probably for the whole rest of the day, but, what are some resources, or from your perspective, gaps as a caregiver that you just don't have today that you really wish you had?
I will say our biggest challenge has been healthcare coverage for her. My husband's self-employed, and I'm her full-time caregiver. And so we were able to get Medicaid for her for a while, but then of course we were over income. So it took me over a year to get her approved to be on a waiver in Ohio. Maybe other states are easier. I don't know. Ohio was not easy. And it was like the biggest relief to know that, okay, I'm going to be able to continue to get this quality of care for my child. And I still, we have pharmacy issues with the drug that she takes. We have to get it from a specialty pharmacy. Well, it's not in network with her insurance. So then we have to use a different pharmacy. And between that and then the DME issues with the feeding tubes, that's our biggest challenge. And I say to my husband all the time, like, I am a smart person and I have the time to sit on the phone and argue with people and tell them what's correct and what they're going to do for me. But it saddens me the amount of people that don't have that, either the time or the ability to fight for themselves.
Yep. No, completely resonates with me too. And I can think of some situations where I've been talking to people that just feel defeated, and it's like, I give up. I can't get anywhere, and trying to find the energy to keep fighting, as you said, like, and being able to do that to drive things forward. Now, Mary Jo, I know obviously just in terms of patient experience, just from another angle, you're dependent on a device. What are some of the challenges that you face in using it, as well as are there any recent, improvements or changes that really impact you day to day?
I always joke about metal detectors. I got my device at a relatively young age. When you think about it, I was in my late 40s when I got my first device, and going through an airport metal detector, it's like, hey, look at me. Everybody from TSA, I've got to explain to them that I have an ICD. The good news now is that body scanners kind of hide that a little bit, but that's just pretty much, that's an easy thing. That's no big deal. One thing that I want to bring up, and as I'm listening to everyone, the term PTSD is tossed around an awful lot these days. But for someone who has survived cardiac arrest, or someone who has gone through what everyone on this panel has gone through, it's a real thing. It's real. And we are easily triggered by a lot of different experiences in our life. I'll tell you what, waking up on a ventilator with a tube down your throat is I can in my mind's eye see that tube all the time. And I think that's something that is, we sort of get used to our situation, but then there'll be little things that trigger it. And it brings us right back. It brings us right back to that fear and that concern. And one of the things, you ask about technologies, one of the things that can happen is anytime there's an advisory about any device. So if, for example, if a company has an advisory about an implanted defibrillator or any type of implanted device, the way that a patient sees that, even if it isn't their device, they're thinking, okay, if the device made by that company can fail, when is mine going to fail?
Exactly. Not to interrupt you, but oh yeah, I see everyone shaking their head.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I think that's something that needs to be taken into account too, is that it may seem like nothing to the manufacturers or to FDA or anyone else, but when we see those, it immediately puts us back to that. And what Heather is saying about insurance, those are the kinds of daily spikes, not being able to get a medication, not being able to get insurance. I had a family, a mother called me one time to say that she and her kid had been kicked out of their carpool because other parents found out that the mother had an implanted defibrillator. And even though she'd never had a cardiac arrest, she got it out of an abundance of caution because her sister had long QT syndrome. And so she got her ICD. They wouldn't let her drive the carpool or have her child in the carpool. And these are the sorts of day-to-day things that impact every one of us that are living with devices or living with some type of health condition.
No, I mean, and that brings up a whole nother, there's the stereotyping and, and labeling that happens. And, your story about the metal detectors, you talk about triggering situations. I remember myself that happening twice. And it was pretty embarrassing, as it was like the TSA agents were making a really big deal about it. And all I wanted to do is get to my flight and get to where I was going. So no, I completely hear you in terms of triggering events. Ali, I'm just curious from your perspective, what would you say, are some of the most significant unmet needs? And is there any particular medical device technology or healthcare system specifically that, you think should be getting addressed?
I'm going to echo a little bit of Mary and Heather touches on both of these points. With Mary, it speaks very deeply to me on the PTSD. I too woke up intubated in China on ibuprofen after spinal surgery because they didn't understand pain management. And when I woke up, because I passed out from pain, and they found morphine and they overdosed me 3 times. And so I still have moments, right? So grief comes and goes, and it's those smallest of moments, hearing someone hiking, of a friend that's hiking in Australia right now. And I remember a moment because I used to be an avid hiker. And I think that really needs to be taken into consideration as well. And then to that question, what Heather said, I really want to expand on that. The most significant unmet need. First off, there are so many medical device technologies that I would like, that I don't have access to, and they are out there, because this speaks directly to our systemically broken healthcare system in the United States. While many of us are advocating and legislating, and I'm on many coalitions in DC, changing, we have to learn to work within a broken system first. The challenge is, unless you were in the corporation, you have these gorgeous PPO plans, which we would all love. I would love that. But I too, Heather, like your husband, I'm an independent contractor. I work for myself. I pay everything out of pocket. I don't qualify for Medicare or Medicaid. So when Obamacare came out, I had to pay full price, but I had access to everything I needed. The plans, and this is not, it's in a gray area, it's legal, but from discrimination against pre-existing conditions, it's coming right back into full force, because with these marketplace plans that many of us have to purchase, or even with Medicare and Medicaid, they're shrinking our networks. Now, for a very healthy, able-bodied person who doesn't have medical conditions, that's fine. For many of us with complex medical diagnoses who need to see these specialists, I can't even see them. 72 hours ago, I was diagnosed with skin cancer. And I was at the dermatologist, and they when they came back with the results, they gave me very long fancy names, and I think this comes to a question later. I understand medical terminology because of my father, but many people don't. And they said, well, we have a specialist. He was not in my network anymore. And I said, well, where would you like me to go? Oh, we don't know. So I'm an avid researcher. So I did my own homework copiously, called many places, got prior authorizations, wrote my own prior authorizations in the last 24 hours to get to see these specialists. And so many people don't have the ability, as Heather mentioned, or the know-how or the time. And it's overwhelming because of the PTSD and the stress and the mental health and the anxiety that comes with being your own advocate or caregiver or for a friend. And so I think that's one of the, the most significant unmet needs, is the lack of financial stability and that fear consistently. I mean, very quickly, I met in Costa Rica. I went for my 40th birthday in April. I went with 6 women, and I met a former executive Walmart executive, very high up, and she was diagnosed with cancer several years earlier. And even with her beautiful retirement plan and Medicare, she couldn't afford the treatments. Her husband has had to go back to work in the corporate world. And these are individuals who are making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. So if we don't have access to these medical technologies, even if they're available because of our health insurance plans, and that is definitely not a one we're going to bite off today, but I think that is on my mind on a daily basis, with hundreds of friends who are on Medicare and Medicaid, and they're told how many catheters they can get a month. They're told by Medicaid how many times they can go pee in a day. Think about that. That is so ethically and morally wrong on so many levels. And many of us are addressing this.
Yep. Now, and I know Kurt and Jen are keeping track from even just the last 30 minutes of our conversation with all the other topics that we can talk about as part of some other MDIC sessions. But no, you're completely right. I mean, insurance and care and who has access to it. And, you know, you can be very, to that person you referenced, you know, financially sound and like still not have access to treatment. And so like, it's really, really discouraging. Before we sort of transition from patient experience to sort of talking about caregivers, I'm curious how they're just in terms of, you know, obviously getting information and getting educated about alternatives and treatment for your daughter. What is that journey? What has that journey been like? And, you know, what advice can you give to others who might be trying to navigate something similar?
Well, we're lucky because we live in Cincinnati, and the only other place I'd want to be with Lila is Boston. You know, we have an amazing children's hospital. And in the beginning, you know, we were thrown at practically every specialty they offer at Children's. And we met with genetics and we did all the genetic testing. And I thought they were going to be some like amazing part of our team. And they got us our diagnosis. It took a year, but we got there. We got it genetically. And they are completely useless to us now. Thankfully, no one is making us see them anymore. Because honestly, I get all of my information from like this social media group on Facebook that we have specific to either patients or caregivers of those with Lila's disorder. You know, when there's less than 400 in the whole world, I think there's only 700 people in this group, and I know most of them, you know, and that's where I get all my good information. I know if something new pops up with Lila, you know, that's the first place I go. When she does something amazing, that's where I go to brag about her. And it's so funny because like I love these other people in this group like they're my own family, you know, like because even with her within her disorder, there's a huge spectrum. You know, some are profoundly disabled, you know, many of them don't speak. And then there are others who really, unless you have a trained eye, you would have no idea that they have anything going on. And they're where I heard about the drug trial. That's where I learned about blood sugar. And I can tell you that I know of at least 3 parents who have messaged me and said to me, if you hadn't screamed at me virtually, of course, about blood sugar, you know, I don't know that my kid would still be here. You saved my child's life. Because for whatever reason, the medical field, because it's, you know, they're dealing with such a small sample size, they don't care, you know. I have about 2 doctors on Lila's team who really do care, and they go above and beyond. But this group, they are amazing. They are my people. And they're my biggest asset, honestly, to Lila's care.
No, for sure. And you bring up your point about like social media groups. I'm actually part of a couple of Facebook groups myself, in particular for my brain tumor, because it couldn't be completely removed. And I have a chance of it coming back. And I go every 6 months for an MRI and I hear what it's doing about what it's doing. But I've continued to learn signs to look out for and get support within a common circle. But that was a circle I had to find on my own, which it sounds like, you know, you did the very same thing. And, you know, having some commonality with people, not only for support, but just sharing of information, because there's so much information to share in so many unique situations like you described. I lied, have one more question, because Mary Jo, I was just thinking, and I know we talked about this a little bit when we first met, but, you know, just in terms of like working with your sister from a patient experience perspective, like, what are your thoughts on like where we're headed with digital solutions and telehealth, and like, how does that come into the whole equation in supporting your sister as well as yourself?
Well, I mean, the good news is that we have remote monitoring for our devices, our implanted devices. And there's the pandemic was making all of us, virtual, and we were seeing our doctors across screens or over the phone. But my remote monitor monitors my device every day. Quarterly, I send a report into transmission into my cardiologist. Currently, I'm living 2.5 hours away from my cardiologist, so it's wonderful. But I will say that I think that we have to have caution about not having that direct face-to-face, not over a screen, but in an office with a physician. I'm retired from emergency medical services as well. And one of the things that we were taught is looking at a patient immediately and saying, sick, not sick. And you do that by just touching their skin. Is it dry? Is it moist? Is it hot? Is it cold? What's the color of it? What's their pulse feel like? Those are the sorts of things that you can't get across the screen. And so there has to be a balance between that virtual, digital, remote capability and seeing your doctor and your doctor seeing you in person. So I don't think we can get away from that. We shouldn't get away from that.
No, and that's a whole remote monitoring. Just putting on my clinical trial hat, that takes me down a whole nother path of conversation that we could have. But I agree with you. You can't replace the in-person aspect of care. And it's definitely something, as all these digital technologies continue to move forward, we definitely need to keep in the back of our mind. Go ahead.
Can I go back to the discussion about social media?
Sure.
I feel very strongly, and this is something I do as on the Patient Safety Advisory Board, is I monitor all of the different online groups that have to do with implanted pacemakers, defibrillators, those sorts of things. And I monitor those partly just to see what other patients are talking about, but also for course correction, because there can be a lot of misinformation out there, and that's just as dangerous as no information. It's more dangerous than no information. And I'm always amazed when I see companies have all these resources on their websites, but where are patients going to ask the questions that they could find answers to on the website or by calling the company? They're going to social media, and it's because we trust other patients, because as patients, we know our bodies better than anybody else does. And we go to talk to other patients because they get us, they understand us. And that's also something that in dealing with families, we as patients know how we're feeling. Our family members don't. And it's very difficult for them to be around us if they can't know what we're feeling. And so I think that we also have to pay attention, not just to the patient, but to their families, and help their families understand as well.
No, that's very valid. And, being around other patients, like just in this community, I know we're all, we were all strangers before we got pulled together for today's session, but just being around and surrounded by other patients, it's therapeutic, it's supportive, and the point you raise is like, that's completely accurate. I'm curious, Ali, as you obviously, in the entire experience that you shared, and we've just been obviously talking about digital technologies, like how has your whole patient experience changed and shifted due to all the changes happening in the digital health world?
From a digital health perspective, for me personally, and also hundreds of individuals I work with, because I work with individuals in different capacities with all disabilities, those who move, sense, think differently, from chronic conditions to blind, low vision, deaf, hard of hearing, mobility impairments. One really great result from COVID from a digital health perspective is a lot of these apps now are more friendly, from booking appointments to finding your test results. And so the information is more accessible. The way in which the information is displayed is not necessarily accessible from an intellectual and or physical standpoint, from a screen reader perspective. Or I was also in the last 30 days diagnosed with on the portal from a CT scan, they said I have facet arthropathy and hypertrophy leading to spinal stenosis. I know what that means. If a patient who doesn't understand medical talk, it's a fancy word for saying your vertebrae are narrowing due to arthritis and enlarging of the vertebrae joints. So that's pushing on a spinal nerve and then my metal in my neck is essentially pushing into my bone. That was a fancy way. And if a patient reads that on their portal, and I called the doctor right away because I wanted to chat with them about this, I couldn't get a hold of anyone. I tried to book an appointment. I tried to use their chat function. I was on hold for an hour. So we're definitely making steps in the right direction. And I think we need to celebrate the small wins because there's, just as Mary mentioned with misinformation on social media groups, there are the naysayers, like several percent sometimes of naysayers. Their voices are louder than those that are actually getting real help. But we have to consistently iterate the process. But how do we do that? We have to do that with data. How do we do that with data? That comes from focus groups and surveys and reaching out to patient organizations. And I have many patient organizations I'm part of that want to be involved in improving digital health and getting involved in clinical trials and medical device technologies, but they don't have access. They don't know where to start. But these medical device companies, they also want these patients. And there's a disconnect of how are we making these connections and partnering together?
No, and that, that also brings up, the whole topic of patient engagement and advocacy. And, if you think about, there's all these groups that want to help and like, you don't know where to start. So if that's a group of people, like, how does it feel for a patient who just gets diagnosed with some or given some like really horrible news? Like, where do you go? I've been there twice, but I knew the second time I was like, I'm going right to, I'm taking this in control to myself, doing my research and, using my network, which honestly ended up being my professional network to try to get me to, like, for example, the only 2 surgeons in Boston that would take my case for my brain tumor. But it was
because
just,
Ami, you're curious and you ask questions, and
Yep.
one connection leads to another in relationships. But there are a lot of patients who don't sadly have the ability or know how to even start. That's why we're all here together today.
Yep. So, Ali, just building upon what you were just talking about, and as we think about, obviously shifting from that digital health question to, what would your advice to be? Because obviously on this call today, like there's this group of us that all have this patient theme in common, but for patients that might be listening to this call, might listen to the recording, like, how do you think it's best for patients to actually engage and interact with industry to help drive what is needed to see change happen?
That's a really tricky question, and I don't think everyone's going to like my answer, but I'm going to go ahead and say it anyway. If you're an individual patient and you want to engage with industry or companies or clinical trials and you don't know where to start, you're going to be spending hours on the internet, and oftentimes people don't look at the source of where a lot of these articles or trials may come from. So my greatest advice would be to, whatever your condition is or diagnosis, find an advocacy group within that, whether it's mobility impairment or cancer or heart disease. Reach out to them, see if they have the connections first with the larger organizations. We have to start there. And oftentimes, many of these larger national organizations, for whatever the medical condition may be, they have local chapters. I'm a big believer in local chapters. They have so much more weight and pull because I'm a board member on way too many boards, national and local ones. And I can tell you, many of us just get more done at the local level because, just like social media groups, we have that personal connection that Mary was chatting about just seeing your doctor in person, meeting people in face and building. You don't only build community, you build family, you build camaraderie, you build information, good information together. But then that in turn has to result in, okay, now we all have this information. Are we going to create a group on social media or a newsletter or posts? Or how are we going to disseminate this information? Very quick example, on my one of my spinal cord injury Facebook groups, there's dozens of them. I have one I love because they're very informative. People come up with these incredible adaptive solutions for their homes every day, but it's stuck on those private groups. There's not one global repository to share these ideas. It's organizations like MDIC, and I was talking to Kurt about this, that we want to build this infrastructure, this digital infrastructure to share these ideas and resources.
And
No, exactly.
Along that
Sorry,
note,
go ahead.
so that was advice for patients. Advice for industry. Industry used to at least in my space, used to fund when I was directing the Care Foundation, used to fund what we called heart-to-heart meetings, and this was done it was done locally, as Ali was saying, chapters. It was done in a major city. It would involve a hospital. There would be a speaker. We would bring families together, and because these were fairly rare disorders, it would be the first time that a lot of families and patients would actually meet somebody else with the same condition. You know, you think you've got horns growing out of your head because you've got this rare condition, but then you meet other people and you find out you're not alone. And that can be done virtually, and it's much more cost effective to do it virtually, but just bringing people together, knowing that they have, and being able to literally talk to one another, not just type on the computer for a Facebook group or social media group, but actually being able to have this sort of a forum where people could talk to one another. That's something that industry could do, and start that up again. Find those advocacy groups and start at the grassroots from there to reach out to patients. And, you know, we're the choir here. We're the ones who are very involved. We're very active. But think about all the majority of patients who are just sitting back and they don't know where to go. You could really start to push that out to engage those patients and get them more involved.
No, and you bring up a good point. I mean, I think about, you know, obviously we have all different populations, demographics that obviously are patients. You know, we've been talking about digital technology, but not everyone, as all of us are, I think, connected to all the digital stuff. So how do you continue to get information to people who need it the most? You know, that's really critical, as well as, you know, I've even thought, you know, you get a diagnosis or you're told by a physician something, but sometimes it's like, oh, and your next appointment's going to be, but you're not necessarily provided resources to connect you to other patients or be able to start this process. Like, you have to kind of do it on your own, but you have to have a drive and know how to be able to do it. And a lot of people, as you just emphasized, you know, don't, and, you know, trying to obviously help them too. Now, I would be remiss without the opportunity, given all the hot topics that are going on, obviously shifting gears here a little bit. You know, if you think about being a patient and patient advocacy, as well as obviously AI and ML has been like a huge and hot topic going on in the industry. I'm really curious, you know, from each of your perspectives, and maybe Mary Jo, will start with you. You know, where do you think AI is going to play a role with, you know, medical device development and market use? And just curious your perspective on where we go from here with it.
That's a question I've thought a lot about, and you know, because of the work I've done in electrocardiograms, we've had automated ECG interpretation since the 70s. So if you think about it, we've had sort of the start of AI there. And I think that the way that you position AI with patients, because we're talking about patients here, is give them an analogy. And any of this group, we've probably all had an ECG, an EKG at some point. If you look at the top of it, it says, you know, it gives you all the interpretive information. That's done by a computer. So AI is not a big stretch as far as I'm concerned. And I think you have to position it with an analogy that a patient can connect to say, all right, so, you know, we're sitting here talking to your doctor. Do you know that the scribe system that's going to take all this information in from our discussion here in the office is going to go through an AI type device to put that into your electronic health record? So that's something they might be able to connect with. And I think that that's how we position it with patients to make them more comfortable with the idea of AI. I've worked with a few companies. If you look at the huge data sets that are created in a sleep study, for example, or in a clinical trial, ECG monitoring in a clinical trial that you're all familiar with, those are huge data sets. And AI will be a tremendous help in those, in just wrangling that data down to something that's actionable.
No, I mean, those data sets are huge, just from obviously all my work with clinical trials. And you're right. I mean, we've been collecting a lot of information for a while, but you know, we haven't been focusing as much on it. And really thinking about, where do we go with it next? And I do agree with you. We got to control the narrative. I'm curious, Heather, obviously as a caregiver for your daughter and, everything going on with us, as a mom, how are you feeling about the use of AI as it relates to the industry?
So when I saw this question on the list that Kurt emailed us, I read it out loud to my husband and I said, I have not thought for 30 seconds of my life about AI and, our journey. And he was like, that's fine. Just say that. I mean, I feel like we're still so much in the trenches, with Lila that that's like down on the horizon for me, and not even on my radar at this point.
No, that's fair. And I'm sure there's plenty of other caregivers and patients that probably feel the same way. It's like going on around us, but obviously it's whatever we need to focus on that's right in front of us. Ali, I'm just curious for you, what are your thoughts on AI and ML and how it folds into this whole equation?
It's a really interesting question and a timely one. First of all, I use AI every day. It's in my daily life and with assistive technology as a quadriplegic. But I was at a healthcare conference just last week at the University of Chapel Hill on the rising cost of drug prices in the health marketplace. It was a very depressing conference, but there was this one panel on AI technology. And there were some experts from different medical technology companies, and they said, listen, patients sometimes get scared of AI because they think of Terminator, that they're going to come over and a tablet is going to diagnose us in 5 seconds. And he goes, that's not the reality, people. That's what he said. He goes, for the coming years, it's going to be very boring. It's going to be taking these mass amount of data sets and inputting them and this information to charts. So doctors and nurses and our healthcare professionals can focus more on the patient and less on the paperwork side. And I have to think critically about that, and I was like, yeah, I don't think Terminator is coming to town anytime soon. But I do appreciate every time I log into a portal, even on my phone, Walgreens, to order my prescription. I only got the app a year ago. I don't know why. Otherwise, you have to call your doctor and you have to wait. Walgreens, you press a button. That's all AI. It's very convenient and it's like if it saves me 10 minutes, I spend about 12 hours a month on the phone with Blue Cross and Blue Shield fighting about something. If I can just take an hour of that month back, right, on certain little apps, to me, that's life-changing.
No, it is life-changing. And as you said, it all adds up. But I think it's all in how, all of us being, I think, educated and being in industry, like you're able to kind of get your head around it more easily and like feel more comfortable with it.
Mm-hmm.
Versus, I can think of some people who might not be as maybe tech savvy or is just, educated from an industry perspective, being, apprehensive and not trusting it. And especially as it relates to something like a medication, being confident that you're still going to like get it on time if it's something obviously that you rely on to live. I think that's critical. I'm curious, just before we hopefully in the time we have left, dive into a question from the audience, but I'm just curious, Mary Jo, wrapping up this question around AI, what do you think, there's obviously trying to explain how AI and ML are used to patients. And what, just from your perspective, like, what are the challenges from the advocacy and industry perspective when engaging with patients on how AI is used?
Well, one of the things that came to mind as Ali was talking about medications is that in that conference, to the flip side and the benefit is that, for example, patients with long QT syndrome, there's a whole host of drugs that we can't take because they further prolong the QT interval, which could put us into cardiac arrest, ventricular fibrillation, and then cardiac arrest. The good news about an AI type of system is, let's say that someone doesn't completely understand the issues around long QT syndrome, prescribes a drug to me, and AI can catch that by knowing that information, and rather than giving that to me, my pharmacist gets a red flag that says, this patient probably shouldn't be taking this medication. That's a benefit. And I think that's how we have to turn it, is just give somebody a very simple example that that says this is a safety thing. This can help you. And so, I mean, that's how I see it. That's what came to mind as Ali was talking.
Oh, sorry. One last thing, Mary Jo, to add to that too, AI, it's going to reduce a lot of medical errors, the wrong CPT code, the wrong diagnosis code that we make. That's a human error. And that's, I think that's a big benefit of AI as well.
Yeah, because medical system's not perfect. Sometimes I think because it's like labeled the medical system, everyone just assumes that like everything's talking to each other and, working really well. Yeah, and working really well, and like it makes mistakes too. So it's, you know what I mean? Like to try to help that, I think is really important. We did get a question before I move on to my very last question, which I would love each of you to answer. We got actually a very interesting question from the audience, which I didn't think about in advance of this, but was a great one is, and maybe we'll start, Mary Jo, with you, is the question was just around like cybersecurity with medical devices and all of this whole conversation. And, how have cybersecurity concerns in your perspective been communicated to patients based upon your experience?
This question comes up frequently on the safety advisory board, and the good news is that companies that have these types of devices have put focus on it, and they're paying good attention to it. And if a patient were to ask me, what about cybersecurity? I say, trust me, the industry is looking at this because it has come up, and no, they can't shut your defibrillator down over the internet if you're the president of the United States. I don't know if anybody saw that show, but yeah, no, they can't. And industry is focused on it. So I feel confident as a patient that it's not something I have to worry about, and I would communicate that to others.
And Ali, what's your thoughts on this?
I'm going to take a page out of Heather's husband's playbook. I have not thought about it that much. I'm not that concerned about it. A urinary tract infection can kill me in 48 hours from sepsis. So honestly, it does not keep me up at night.
Exactly the right answer, Kelly. It's exactly the right answer. We've got big fish to fry.
Yeah, you gotta keep it all in perspective. And honestly, that's a great, I love the analogy, because if you just think about, you pick up your phone, and especially if you have alerts set up on websites, you can suddenly see information. And this kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier, that affects you based upon your condition. And then you start to think about other things. And like, at the end of the day, like you do have bigger fish to fry. Like you have the things that are right in front of you that like you need to focus on. And yeah, there may be all these other things going on around us, but it's really what's in the forefront. I think I'm going to ask you guys both one more question before I ask my last question, which is, obviously, all of us are obviously living in the med tech industry. And, what would you say is your biggest challenge, whether it be obviously as a patient or a caregiver, in just interacting with medical device companies? So maybe Ali, we'll start with you.
My biggest challenges with interacting with medtech companies thus far, I must admit, my advocacy career started out in a different way within health insurance, and organically started kind of went down a winding road into medtech. And because I am pleasantly persistent, I love people and connections and relationships, I will email you 50 times politely with a smile until you reach back out to me. And that has afforded me beautiful opportunities to work with different medical technology companies on behalf of others. The challenges I face with the handful that I'm working with and consulting with now is they don't know what they don't know. They don't know what questions to ask. And there's industry trends. And I was reading papers on this before I was at the MedTech conference a few weeks ago with on behalf of BD. And they don't know where they want patients on the ground floor with clinical trials but while they're developing medical technology, new medical technologies, but they don't know where to start. They don't know where to go, which is still, it boggles my mind a little bit, to be honest with you. And that's what I'm helping them with. So that's a challenge that they're facing on the patient side. And I get reached out to by for clinical trials, for studies all the time. And the panelists who spoke prior to us about compensation, So many people with disabilities or complex medical diagnoses are getting asked to participate in surveys or focus groups or clinical trials. So most of the time, honestly, a lot of it's free of charge because the answer, and I've gotten this multiple times, well, we're developing this technology for you down the road. Well, my time and my experience, that's worth something, right?
Yep.
And so I think there needs to be a shift in the framework in that as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, there is a cost to our time. And
I
you
don't know
know,
do what I do to make money in life. The advocacy is because I love that, but I still have to pay my bills.
exactly,
Yes.
exactly. No, and I don't think that's always something that is in the forefront of everyone's mind. I'm curious, Mary Jo, just before I go to the last question, like what are your thoughts on this?
Very simple. The patient is the customer. The physician is the service provider. Not to be disrespectful, but they are providing a service. But at the end of the day, the customer is the patient. The patient is paying for this. Oh, will they have insurance? No, you're paying for your insurance as well. So the customer is the patient. We need to remind industry of that every single time we talk to them. I am your customer.
Think about, medical device reps, they're working for the medical device company, they go meet with the physician. How often are they sitting down with the patients who are actually using those devices at the end of the day as the customer? So I think that's completely relevant. Before I move on to just in closing, the last question for both of you, and Heather unfortunately had to go tend to her daughter, so we wish her well and just thank her for participating with us. I just want to thank everyone who has taken the time to join today, to listen to this panel, to listen to our first speaker and the wonderful additional speakers that MDIC has put together as part of this patient panel. I've had the opportunity for a number of years now to be involved with MDIC, and I couldn't be more impressed by the work that everyone does to just bring together amazing individuals with amazing stories to continue to help drive change in our industry. Mary Jo and Ali, I just want to give you guys a huge virtual hug. Sharing stories they're triggering, they're powerful, and they're not easy. And I just want to say thank you to both of you for being here today. And I just couldn't be more excited to be part of this industry and have had the opportunity to spend time with both of you as well as Heather today. I would say in closing, I shared my story obviously at the onset of our discussion a little over an hour ago. And my hope coming out of today is that my story helps inspire other people to get mammograms. If you don't feel right, don't give up and keep pushing to get a diagnosis. I didn't realize that being dizzy was going to lead to an MRI and then getting told I had a brain tumor, but that's what happened. And it only came because I advocated for myself that I didn't feel right. And so I really hope that from my story that I inspire other people, if you don't feel right, to take action on, making sure that you get follow-up. What I would say to both of you is, just in closing to this conversation this morning, what is one thing that you hope the audience takes away from your story? And maybe Mary Jo, I'll start with you.
Thanks. First of all, I just want to say that after 40 some years on this journey, and yes, I started it when I was 10 years old. 40 some years, it's so gratifying to see that industry is taking a serious interest in the patient and in listening to the patient. And I would, in closing, say, don't just listen to the patient, also listen to their families and to their caregivers, because we're all affected.
Thank you, Mary Jo, and thank you so much for being here today. And Ali, what is the one thing that you hope everyone takes away from you today?
Be your own self-advocate. If you can't be it for yourself, lean on the family. If you're fortunate enough to have family, as many of us do, if you don't, go to your social media group, find a group online, ask for help if you don't know the answer, if you're scared, if you're going through something, because it's not chances. There are definitely others who are dealing with the same anxiety, stress, medical conditions you are. So it all comes down to self-advocacy, whatever that means within your world.
No, and that resonates with me as well, Ali. And again, thank you for you taking the time today. I hope that I have the opportunity to one day meet you and Mary Jo in person to be able to continue this conversation. And again, to everyone who joined us virtually, I just want to thank you for joining this portion of MDIC's annual patient forum. Please don't hesitate to connect with me on LinkedIn. If my network can be of help to anyone that's here, or help any other patients, that's why I'm here, and that's why I devoted my time this morning to supporting MDIC.